A probate attorney reviewing my father-in-law's estate asked, almost as a formality, for a copy of my marriage certificate to confirm my legal standing as an heir alongside my husband. I dug through our filing cabinet expecting a routine document search, and instead discovered that the marriage certificate we'd kept for 15 years had never actually been filed with the county, because the friend who officiated our wedding had never registered as a legally authorized officiant in the state where we married. 15 years, 2 children, a house, joint finances, and legally, according to the state, none of it had ever included an actual marriage. My name is Christine, and this is the story of the single most disorienting legal discovery of my entire adult life. One that forced my husband and me to confront the strange, unsettling reality that our entire 15-year partnership, built on what we'd always understood as a legally binding commitment, had actually existed in a kind of legal limbo neither of us had any idea we were living in. I want to explain the specific circumstances of our original wedding, because I think understanding exactly how this oversight occurred matters to understanding just how genuinely, innocently this entire situation unfolded, rather than representing any kind of deliberate fraud. My husband, Marcus, and I married 15 years ago in a small, informal backyard ceremony, deliberately choosing an intimate, low-budget wedding over anything more elaborate. Given that we were both in our mid-20s at the time, working entry-level jobs, and prioritizing saving for our future over an expensive ceremony, we asked my husband's close college friend, David, to officiate our wedding, a decision that felt, at the time, genuinely meaningful given their decade-long friendship, and financially practical given the significant cost difference between hiring a professional officiant versus having a trusted friend handle the ceremony. David had, according to what he told us at the time, completed an online ordination process through a well-known organization that many states recognize for exactly this purpose, a process he described as quick and straightforward, requiring only a simple online application and modest fee. I want to describe the specific administrative process we understood ourselves to be following at the time, because I think this matters considerably to understanding how this entire oversight ultimately occurred without either Marcus or me recognizing any problem for 15 years. David completed his online ordination, obtained what appeared to be legitimate documentation confirming his status, and officiated our ceremony, after which we understood the standard process to involve submitting our signed marriage license, along with David's officiant credentials, to the county clerk's office for official filing and registration. I want to be direct about the specific point where this entire process apparently broke down, though we wouldn't understand this until 15 years later. David had, in fact, completed a legitimate online ordination process through a widely recognized organization. However, the specific state where we married required, beyond this basic online ordination, an additional registration step. Officiants needed to formally register their ordination credentials directly with the county clerk's office before performing any legally recognized marriage ceremony, a requirement that neither David nor Marcus and I had any awareness of at the time. I want to describe what actually happened, as best as we've been able to reconstruct 15 years later regarding this missing registration step. David had completed his ordination and understood himself to be legally authorized to perform our ceremony, an entirely reasonable, good faith understanding given how many states don't require this additional county-level registration step, and how easily this specific requirement could be overlooked by someone unfamiliar with the particular administrative nuances of our specific state's marriage laws. Following our ceremony, we signed our marriage license, and David signed as officiant. And we understood ourselves to have completed the process by mailing this signed license to the county clerk's office, a step we genuinely believed we'd completed correctly at the time, receiving what we understood to be our official marriage certificate roughly 6 weeks later in the mail. I want to describe what we would eventually learn, 15 years later, about this official marriage certificate we'd received and subsequently used, without any question or concern, throughout the following decade and a half, for our joint tax filings, for adding each other to health insurance policies, for every legal and financial document requiring proof of our marital status. This certificate, it would eventually become clear, had actually been improperly processed by the county clerk's office itself, apparently issued in error despite David's missing registration, an administrative mistake on the government's end that compounded our own innocent oversight regarding David's incomplete officiant credentials. I want to explain the specific circumstances that finally, 15 years later, brought this entire situation to light. My father-in-law passed away roughly 4 months ago, and as part of settling his estate, Marcus, as one of his legal heirs, needed to provide various documentation confirming his legal relationships, including, as a routine part of the broader estate documentation, a copy of our marriage certificate to establish my own legal standing regarding certain spousal inheritance provisions within his will. I want to describe the specific, mundane moment this entire discovery began, sitting at our kitchen table with the estate attorney, a careful, experienced woman named Ms. Patterson, who was reviewing our documentation as part of what she described as simply routine verification. Nothing she anticipated would reveal any actual problem. "I want to just double-check something," she said, examining our marriage certificate more closely than I'd expected for what I'd assumed would be a simple formality. "This certificate doesn't have the county recording stamp I'd typically expect to see. Do you happen to have any additional documentation showing this was actually filed and recorded?" I want to try to describe the specific, disorienting confusion of that question, genuinely believing, at the time, that this represented some kind of minor administrative technicality rather than anything approaching the actual devastating discovery that would eventually unfold over the following weeks. Ms. Patterson recommended we contact the county clerk's office directly to obtain a certified copy of our marriage record, explaining that while she suspected this might simply represent some kind of minor filing discrepancy, she wanted to ensure everything was properly documented before finalizing the estate paperwork requiring proof of our marital status. I want to describe the following devastating phone call to the county clerk's office, a call I made expecting simply to request a routine certified copy, instead receiving information that fundamentally upended my understanding of my own marriage. I'm not finding any record of a marriage filing under that name for that date, the clerk's office representative told me, after searching their system for several minutes. "Are you certain this marriage was actually filed with our office? Sometimes officiants fail to submit the paperwork properly, which would mean the marriage was never actually legally recorded." I want to try to describe the specific, vertiginous shock of hearing this information, understanding, in real time, that 15 years of what I believed was a legally binding, properly documented marriage might actually never have been officially, legally recognized at all. I called Marcus immediately, my hands shaking as I tried to explain what I'd just learned, both of us struggling to process information that seemed almost impossible to fully comprehend given 15 years of shared life built entirely on the assumption that our legal marriage represented solid, unquestionable ground. I want to describe the following weeks, an exhausting, surreal process of working with both Ms. Patterson and a family law attorney we subsequently consulted, attempting to fully understand exactly what had gone wrong and what our actual legal status had been throughout the preceding 15 years. Our family law attorney, a thorough, patient man named Mr. Alvarez, eventually pieced together the full sequence of errors that had led to this devastating situation. David's ordination, while legitimate at a basic level, had never been properly registered with our specific county as required by our state's particular marriage laws. The marriage license we'd signed and believed we'd properly filed had apparently been processed, erroneously, by an overworked, understaffed county clerk's office during a period Mr. Alvarez discovered had been documented, through unrelated news coverage from that same year, as experiencing significant administrative backlogs and errors due to a substantial funding and staffing shortage. I want to try to describe the specific, disorienting reality Mr. Alvarez ultimately confirmed, because David had never properly registered as a legally authorized officiant in our county, and because the county clerk's office had erroneously processed and issued a marriage certificate despite this missing registration, our marriage had, according to the strict letter of state law, never actually been legally valid, despite 15 years of believing otherwise, despite the certificate we'd used for countless legal and financial purposes throughout this entire period. I want to describe the specific, overwhelming legal and practical complexity this revelation introduced into our lives. 15 years of joint tax filings, potentially requiring some form of correction or amendment. Our children's legal status, though thankfully, Mr. Alvarez quickly reassured us, unaffected by this specific issue, given established legal precedent protecting children's legitimacy regardless of their parents' marital validity. Our house, purchased and held under both our names based on our understood marital status. Our various insurance policies, retirement account beneficiary designations, and countless other legal and financial arrangements all built upon an assumption of legal marriage that, we were now understanding, had never actually technically existed. I want to describe the specific, exhausting process of legal remediation that followed, working with Mr. Alvarez to understand our actual options for resolving this situation, given that simply continuing to operate under our mistaken belief clearly wasn't a viable path forward, particularly given the specific inheritance and estate matters that had originally surfaced this entire devastating discovery. Mr. Alvarez explained that our most straightforward path forward involved what he described as a confirmation marriage. Essentially, formally, legally remarrying, this time ensuring absolute, verified compliance with every specific requirement our state's marriage laws actually demanded, a process that would establish clear, unambiguous legal marriage from that new date forward, while requiring us to separately address the complicated question of our legal status throughout the preceding 15 years for purposes of retroactive matters like tax filings and property ownership documentation. I want to describe the specific, surreal experience of planning, essentially, a second wedding after 15 years of marriage, 2 children, and a shared life we'd always understood as legally, completely bound together. I want to be honest that this process involved a genuinely complicated mixture of emotions, a kind of dark humor about the absurdity of our situation, alongside genuine anxiety about the practical legal and financial complications this discovery had introduced, alongside, somewhat unexpectedly, a strange, quiet tenderness about approaching marriage vows again. However unusual the circumstances prompting this second ceremony actually were. I want to describe the specific, difficult process of addressing the retroactive legal questions this discovery raised, working with both Mr. Alvarez and a tax attorney to understand exactly what corrections or amendments might be necessary regarding 15 years of joint tax filings submitted under an assumption of legal marriage that, technically, had never actually existed. I want to describe learning, through this process, that our specific situation, while genuinely unusual, wasn't entirely unprecedented, our attorneys explaining that various legal doctrines, including something called putative spouse status, existed specifically to address situations where a couple had genuinely, reasonably believed themselves to be legally married despite some underlying technical defect, providing some legal protection and continuity for matters like our children's legitimacy and certain property rights. Even though this doctrine didn't fully resolve every practical complication our specific situation had introduced, I want to describe the specific, difficult conversation Marcus and I had with David, the friend whose incomplete officiant registration had ultimately, if entirely unintentionally, caused this entire devastating situation. I want to be fair in emphasizing that David's error appeared, based on everything our attorneys were able to determine, to represent genuine, good faith ignorance of a specific administrative requirement, rather than any kind of deliberate deception or negligence on his part. I had no idea there was an additional county registration step, David told us, during this difficult conversation, clearly devastated upon learning the consequences his oversight had ultimately caused. The organization I got ordained through never mentioned anything about needing separate county-level registration. I genuinely believed I'd done everything necessary to legally officiate your wedding. I want to describe our own complicated process of processing this specific explanation, understanding that while David's error had ultimately caused 15 years of legal complications neither Marcus nor I had any idea we were living with, his underlying good faith and genuine ignorance of this specific requirement made this situation feel fundamentally different from a deliberate betrayal, more akin to a genuinely unfortunate, if significant, administrative accident than any kind of intentional wrongdoing. I want to describe our second, confirmation wedding ceremony, which took place roughly 4 months after this entire discovery began unfolding, a considerably smaller, more private gathering than our original ceremony 15 years earlier, but one carrying a specific, unexpected emotional weight given everything we'd navigated to arrive at this moment. I want to describe standing across from Marcus during this second ceremony, our 2 children present as witnesses this time, understanding the specific strangeness of formally, legally marrying someone I'd already considered my husband for 15 years, someone I'd built an entire life alongside, understanding now that this second ceremony represented not the beginning of our commitment to each other, but rather the long overdue legal formalization of a partnership that had, in every meaningful, practical sense beyond the strict letter of state law, already existed completely and genuinely throughout the preceding 15 years. I want to describe the specific, ongoing practical work that followed this second ceremony, working with our various attorneys to properly address the retroactive legal questions our original situation had raised, ultimately resulting in amended tax filings for several previous years where the statute of limitations still allowed for correction, updated property documentation formally establishing our joint ownership under our now confirmed legal marriage, and updated beneficiary designations across our various financial accounts to eliminate any remaining ambiguity our original, invalid marriage certificate might have introduced. I want to be honest about the specific, lingering strangeness this entire experience has left me with, even now, several months after our confirmation ceremony formally resolved the core legal issue. There remains something genuinely unsettling about understanding that 15 years of my adult life, built around a foundational belief in my own legal marital status, had actually existed in a kind of unrecognized legal limbo, one that could have created considerably more devastating practical complications had it surfaced during some other, less fortunate circumstance than a relatively straightforward estate matter. I want to describe the specific, complicated gratitude I've developed regarding the particular way this discovery ultimately unfolded, understanding how much worse this situation could have become had it surfaced instead during a genuine crisis, a serious medical emergency requiring clear spousal medical decision-making authority, a sudden death requiring clear inheritance rights, or a divorce proceeding where our actual legal marital status might have created genuinely devastating complications regarding property division and spousal support that our 15 years of assumed marriage would have otherwise clearly established. I've since become, understandably, considerably more attentive to the specific administrative details underlying significant legal and financial arrangements throughout my life, understanding, in a way I genuinely never anticipated needing to understand before this experience, how completely a genuine, good faith belief in your own legal status can exist alongside an underlying technical reality that contradicts everything you've assumed to be true, sometimes for years, without any indication whatsoever that something has gone fundamentally wrong. It's been just over 7 months since that initial, disorienting phone call with the county clerk's office first revealed the discrepancy that eventually unraveled 15 years of assumed legal marriage. Marcus and I remain, now unambiguously, legally married, our confirmation ceremony having resolved the core legal question that originally threw our entire understanding of our own relationship into such genuine uncertainty. I think, often, about the specific, strange nature of this particular betrayal, understanding that unlike so many stories involving deliberate deception or calculated exploitation, our situation emerged from an entirely unintentional, good faith series of small administrative oversights, each individually understandable, that somehow compounded into 15 years of genuine legal uncertainty neither Marcus nor I had any way of recognizing until an entirely unrelated estate matter happened to surface the underlying problem. If you've ever discovered that a significant legal or financial arrangement you trusted completely for years actually rested on some fundamental, previously unrecognized technical defect, I want to hear how you navigated both the practical remediation process and the deeper, more unsettling question this kind of discovery inevitably raises about how much we actually fully verify regarding the legal foundations underlying our most significant life commitments. I used to believe that receiving an official marriage certificate, properly signed and formally issued through what appeared to be legitimate government channels, represented an unambiguous, permanently secure confirmation of our legal marital status. I've learned, in the most disorienting way possible, that even official-looking government documentation can sometimes rest on underlying administrative errors invisible to everyone involved, and that sometimes the most fundamental assumptions we build our entire adult lives around deserve more active verification than most of us ever think to provide.